All right, so we are ready for our next presenter, and it is the co-host, co-creator of this amazing webinar, Alastor Van Kleeck. They have a PhD in English. Alastor lives with their partner Roz near Chapel Hill, North Carolina. They spend most of their time working at the Triangle Chicken Advocates Sanctuary, which we were just talking about, which Alastor and Roz founded in 2014 and which inspired them to start the Microsanctuary Movement together. Alastor has presented at national conferences, been interviewed on numerous podcasts, including mine, the Hope for the Animals podcast. And their writings are available at strivingwithsystems.com, an amazing blog site. And we're going to get to hear all about roosters. I'm so excited to hear this presentation. Thank you, Alastor, for being here. Go for it.
All right, thanks so much, Hope. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. It's a real honor to have the third chicken webinar. To have something focused exclusively on chickens, and now doing it 3 years in a row. It's really wonderful. When we started our sanctuary back in 2014, there was definitely seemed like there was a lot less interest in chicken care and chicken rescue and just information about chickens and advocacy for chickens. So I'm thrilled to see all this participation and interest. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can get started with my presentation, and we will learn some more about roosters. So it may take a minute, so give me a sec. Okay. Okay, so the title of my presentation is "Where Are Their Brothers? The Absent and Unwanted Rooster." And so what I'd like to do is kind of talk a little bit about just kind of some basic information about like the history of roosters in relation to chicken domestication, some kind of issues with farming and why roosters are facing so many challenges in our culture, and then some insights based on our experience as people who have rescued and cared for chickens, first for roosters now for over 8 years. So I just want to say really quickly that I love roosters. I think they're fascinating. They're so interesting. They have such big personalities and they're such unique individuals that I feel like I have learned a lot about and from roosters, just engaging with the world and learning how to interact with them and kind of be part of their flock here at our sanctuary has been something that's been a real amazing process for me. And so when I look out into the rest of the world, whether that's non-vegans or whether it's other sanctuaries and rescuers, like people who don't like roosters and clearly don't understand roosters, it's something that for me I take very personally, and would really like to help educate other people about, so that we can maybe start to change perspectives on roosters and also end the stigma that has been associated with roosters for centuries now. So let me start with a brief history of domestication. Obviously, there's a lot more to this, and if you're interested, I highly recommend doing some research. There's a good article in the Smithsonian magazine called "How the Chicken Conquered the World." It's obviously from a chicken eater's perspective, but they have some really cool info in there. So basically, chickens were domesticated from a species called red junglefowl, who still live in Southeastern Asia. And they may have, kind of mixed some other species in there as well of junglefowl, but primarily red junglefowl. And so when you observe red junglefowl in nature, you can learn a lot about the kind of ancestral heritage of chickens and see ways in which modern domesticated chickens are similar to, but also different from, their wild ancestors. And so that happened around, many other domestication instances around 7,000 to 10,000 years ago. And it's possible that domestication was primarily associated with cockfighting rather than food production. It's hard to say, like in different cultures, like which was more important, but across the board, cockfighting was a major reason why chickens were kept around. And so cockfighting may actually be the world's oldest continual sport. And you should put very heavy scare quotes around the word sport there. But it's something that humans have been doing for quite a long time. And so while the breeding and keeping of chickens is in itself thousands of years old, the reality is that for most of their history, eating chickens may have been less of a priority than using roosters for fighting in different cultures. And the image I have here is actually a fresco from Rome, showing two roosters fighting, obviously. So, so I'll get my slide to go. So yeah, so the fighting is definitely something that has been associated with roosters for a very long time. So we really start to see a shift towards chickens used primarily as a food source, kind of within the past century or two, especially in the 20th century. New research and new breeding methods allowed people to produce chickens who were unnaturally productive, whether that's in terms of flesh production or egg laying, hens laying eggs. So, and then towards the end of the century, chicken actually became the most consumed flesh in the United States, over ones that maybe have more of a cultural cachet, like beef, cow flesh. And so nowadays, around 8 billion chickens are slaughtered every year for flesh production in the US. And then many millions more are either in the process of being used or are being slaughtered as part of the egg industry. And at the same time, backyard chickens are increasingly popular amongst people in all sorts of living situations, whether that they're out in the country or even in many towns and cities are increasingly allowing people to keep backyard chickens. And the supposedly providing a sustainable and humane food source, which is obviously not something that is true, but it's the image that chicken keeping has among people who are into that sort of thing. So so the growth, especially in the backyard chicken keeping, has been one of the biggest reasons why there's so much growth in the need for rooster rescue. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So, but generally speaking, it seems like in our culture, much of the conversation about chickens, including the advocacy we do and the education, it tends to focus a lot on hens, because so much of it is associated with eating eggs. Now, both roosters and hens are killed for flesh breed production. So if you don't know, the chickens used for flesh production are a unique breed of chickens that are separate from the type that are used primarily for egg laying. So those flesh breed chickens, they're called Cornish crosses. They're slaughtered at only like 6 to 8 weeks of age, which is when they're still babies. They're still making baby chicken noises at that time. And that's several months before roosters are going to start to show signs of sexual maturity. So for flesh production, they don't do there's not so much of the sexing thing and all that sort of stuff. It's really just you're killing babies. And so there are roosters and hens both mixed into those farms that raise Cornish crosses for flesh production. So, but in generally speaking, most of the positive associations we have with chickens seem to be associated with hens. The images of like mother hens brooding on their nest and hiding chicks within their wings and things like that. We have a lot of positive associations with chickens that are to hens, and hens are the chickens that we most often see like in backyard chicken flocks because roosters aren't allowed. But in reality, we're missing completely the other 50% of chickens, which is the male chickens, which is roosters. So in general, roosters continue to be either absent from the picture in the conversation, or they're associated with some of those negative traits that we inherit from their continued association with things like cockfighting. And so from the very beginning, roosters are the unwanted half of the chicken equation. And so I say half deliberately because chickens, like most species, hatch roughly equal numbers of male and female chicks. So on the average, if you take a clutch of eggs and you hatch them, you're going to have roughly 50-50 male and female chicks. And so what that means is that in hatcheries, most of the time they're going to be sexing chicks and they're going to be killing male chicks. You've very likely seen information about this where they send the chicks, down the conveyor belts into the macerators, or they suffocate them in large bags. There are various ways of dispatching them, but basically after just a few hours old, there's a way that you can somewhat reliably determine the sex of chicks. And so the male chicks will be separated out and then usually killed. Sometimes they do get sent along with chicks who are supposed to be female, whether that's accidentally or like during colder months, especially, they'll be sometimes put in there as like packaging material to help keep the hen chicks warm. But either way, in most cases, people who hatch chicks are going to be sexing, who are selling them are going to be trying to sex them and then to eliminate the roosters, because again, people aren't usually buying chicks for the roosters. They're buying chicks because they want hens, because they want eggs. And so here's just a picture of chicks being shipped male, and some of them are probably roosters and some hens. Now, one thing that I want to point out with the whole sexing process and the issue of chicks, and the fact that the roosters are unwanted from the very beginning, is that when someone purchases chicks from a hatchery, the price that they're paying is going to be it's going to be padded so that the hatchery can make up for those male chicks that they're not going to be making money on. So even if you buy sexed chicks, even if you're not getting roosters that you are personally killing, you're directly contributing to the death of baby boys, basically, at the hatchery. Not only because like the boys are definitely being born there, but also because the money that you're paying is going to help, offset the price, the loss that the hatchery is absorbing from the fact that the males are born. And so this is true no matter what sort of hatchery you get the chicks from. If you're buying sex chicks or whatever type of farm, this sort of like of sexing and like adjusting the price of sex chicks is true on all scales. And then one other way that roosters are dispatched is what are called fry pan chicks. They're sold basically because they are the size that would be easy to fry up in a pan. It's kind of a terrible colloquialism, but some places will sell baby roosters specifically as fry pan chicks, as a way to make up some of that money that they're not otherwise going to be getting from people who buy the sex chicks. And so also on when chickens are not born like in a hatchery, but on a farm, the males are often typically killed as well. If the farm is selling the chicks, they'll either sell them as straight run or unsexed chicks, or like I said, they'll do their own sexing and kill the babies. For those that get the straight run chicks, they usually keep all the chicks together until the roosters start to show signs of sexual maturity at around 4 to 6 months of age. And that's going to be things like crowing, obviously, changes in their feathering and their comb coloring and size and stuff like that. And so basically the way that you can kind of understand the attitude towards roosters on farms is once they crow, out they go. And so the result of that is that the vast majority of roosters don't even make it past sexual maturity. So the few roosters that we see as adults are the very lucky minority who have somehow managed to make it past that period where they're either killed as babies or they start to show themselves as roosters and they get dispatched. Because really, the only reason farmers would have to keep roosters around is for the idea that they would somehow protect the flock of hens, or if they're breeding. And you really don't need a lot of roosters around to accomplish, those goals. And so in most cases, farmers see them as basically an extra mouth to feed and as a nuisance. And so the nuisance aspect of roosters is not only kind of the interactions with farmers, but on a social level. And so that's why a lot of cities and towns that allow people to keep backyard chickens actually prohibit roosters. And it's usually seen as like because they're a nuisance with their crowing and other sounds that they may make. And so typically the only association that people have with roosters is that they wake them up early, and that's annoying if their neighbor happens to have a rooster. And so basically these natural behaviors that chickens have are usually interpreted as annoying or as aggressive or as these negative qualities that people don't want, because they obviously, the reason that they have chickens is not for the roosters, it's for the hens. So let's see if I get my slide to turn. So yeah, so if you live somewhere that has backyard chicken allowances, just as an experiment, you should definitely check out the actual language of the ordinances in your town, and you're almost certain to find that they have prohibited roosters. So you'll probably also see roosters at the local shelters. And so one thing that we deal with across the country here in the US, and I know other places deal with it as well, is rooster dumping, which is basically when somebody in a suburban area gets a bunch of chicks and all of a sudden one of them starts crowing and they can't keep the rooster. And so what do? Most people, if they don't, send them to a farm or take them to the shelter, they'll drive out into the country and toss them out into the woods, thinking that, maybe the chicken can live out there and the rooster can live out there and, be safe. But unfortunately, roosters and chickens generally, they're domesticated animals. So they're not equipped to live successfully in most places as wild animals. They experience starvation and malnutrition, attacks from predators, all sorts of things that make it unsafe for them to be dumped out in the wild. And so this, I think, is a really important point for people to be aware of, is that wherever you have a backyard chicken, community, or, you have backyard chicken allowances, you're going to have a connection to these suffering roosters who are being either killed as babies, killed when they're starting to mature, or are being dumped once they start to show themselves as roosters. And the requests that we get to take in roosters and the calls that we get about stray roosters, 99.999% of them are coming from people who have kept backyard chickens and suddenly find themselves with a rooster that they don't want or can't keep. And I can't emphasize this point enough, is that this is one of the things that makes backyard eggs and backyard chicken keeping, part of the industry of exploitation and suffering. That's just farther along the scale you reach, the massive battery cage sheds and these large scale farms. It's all a matter of scale. And where they're at on the spectrum. It's not a matter of some type of chicken farm being good while all the others are bad. They all participate in this industry that causes the suffering of roosters and dead roosters, and puts an immense pressure on sanctuaries. So I can't speak for every sanctuary in the United States, but I can guarantee that the vast majority of them, the number one request that they're getting to take in an animal is a rooster. And that's all being driven by backyard chicken keeping. So, if people who keep backyard chickens, or perhaps you keep backyard chickens and consume eggs and participate in this, you just have to understand that if you buy or breed chickens but cannot keep and care for every single rooster that does or could potentially come, along with every single hen that you have, what you're doing and what these people are doing, it's not sustainable. It's not compassionate. It's not humane. And at the end of the day, it's not the rooster's fault. This is just biology. And, unfortunately, because we devalue roosters so much, they're seen as a problem. And so the title of my presentation is driven by this recognition that whenever someone points out a happy flock of hens in their backyard and discusses all the happy eggs that they get, the question that you need to keep in mind and ask them is, where are their brothers? Because chickens, hatch equal numbers of male and female chicks, every one of those hens has a dead or abandoned rooster brother somewhere. And we cannot ignore that fact and pretend that the discussion can only be about the experiences of hens in egg farms. And I think it's very important that we talk at length and in detail about what hens experience as part of our advocacy. But I think we also have to remember that the roosters are an inescapable part of this conversation as well. And even if we don't see them, we cannot forget that they go through this as too. And so, as you probably can gather, there's a lot of misunderstanding of roosters that goes into kind of how we view roosters culturally. And even as vegans, I think we inherit a lot of these narratives about roosters, and we a lot of times perpetuate them. And we have to recognize that so much of this information and this kind of supposed knowledge of roosters that we get is not coming from direct experience with roosters, and it's not coming from people who have a compassion-based, care-based experience with roosters. It's coming from farmers and cockfighters and people who want to exploit roosters or want to dispatch roosters. But as you can probably guess, the truth about roosters is so much more rich and complex and fascinating. And I have to say, it's been such a huge learning process for me, because I remember when we started our sanctuary in 2014, we started with 2 hens, and whom we rescued from a local shelter. And I remember talking with my partner about, we were starting to see how many roosters there were at local shelters as well. And we were sort of like, okay, well, this is such an issue, what are we going to do? And I remember that, there was a certain degree of kind of uncertainty about it, because, the impression that we had of roosters was that they were going to be aggressive and, they're kind of scary. And so, this was a myth that we had inherited as well, even after we had rescued our first 2, sanctuary residents. And so, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk now about some of the things that I've learned about the truth of roosters, and hopefully, we can start to debunk some of those myths. So chicken, just FYI, refers to hens and roosters. So if you say roosters and chickens, that doesn't make any sense. It's roosters are males, hens are females, they're both chickens. So just FYI on a language front. So hens and roosters are both naturally, chickens in general are naturally social beings. And as members of flocks, they have unique relationships that are being shaped by instinctual roles and flock dynamics that stretch all the way back to their ancestors. So we can look at the flocks of red junglefowl, and we can see the way that they interact and see a lot of the same thing happenings in domesticated chickens. And so roosters in particular play key roles within a flock. Their role is not to be a big bully who beats everybody up, but to actually to protect, to nurture, to keep the peace, and to basically to be, a flock mate and a friend to the other members of their flock. And so I think one of the most fascinating and most telling things about the reality of roosters is looking at rooster relationships, and the way that roosters relate to other members of their flock. And so we're all likely familiar with that kind of archetypal image of rooster with a flock of hens around him, kind of protecting and talking to the hens and things like that. And that's definitely true. But roosters, but I think that also kind of doesn't really give the full picture of the emotional kind of lives of roosters and the way that they create social bonds with other chickens. And so, I think we have this idea that roosters can never get along with another rooster. Like every single rooster can be with hens, but could never ever be with another rooster. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make in understanding just the reality of rooster behavior. So not only is it true that multi-rooster mixed flocks are common in red junglefowl. So like you can have one, we'll call them alpha rooster, and then other kind of younger roosters around with a number of hens. like that kind of mixed flock of roosters and hens is very common in red jungle fowl. It's not just pairs or like one rooster and a few hens. That's actually, we definitely, there have been observed multi-rooster mixed flocks. So red jungle fowl, can do it, can exist with multi-roosters in one flock. And similarly, we, at our sanctuary, we've had mixed flocks where there have been multiple roosters coexisting on, in one a living area with with several flocks of hens. And so we've also, in addition to seeing the relationship between roosters and hens, we've also learned a lot about the way that roosters relate to each other as part of rooster-only flocks. Many people call these bachelor flocks, but we've actually posted about this on our TCA page a number of years ago now, where we moved away from calling rooster-only flocks bachelor flocks because we don't want to get into this kind of situation of normalizing, like rooster hen relationships as kind of the only legitimate type of relationship that can be emotionally fulfilling and can have affection. And, so we don't want to prioritize one type of relationship over another, because as we've seen with the roosters, these are very tight bonds that they have. And so we've, had as much as one single rooster flock of 40 plus roosters to as small as, kind of couples and thruples of roosters who are, kind of bonded together, kind of either having their own space or, living amidst a larger flock. And, I think the point that I really want to make with talking about roosters is the way in which they're not just this killing machine that I think a lot of our cultural understanding of them is like, but form strong, long-lasting bonds with other roosters. Indeed, we've seen that the 2 to 3 rooster friend group is actually one of the most stable, peaceful, and mutually supportive flock sizes for roosters. And in many cases, the roosters seem much happier to be in a small rooster flock than they are if they have a lot of hens to kind of oversee, and like you feel like the whole responsibility is on them. And so even without hens around, we've watched roosters engage in these instinctual nurturing behaviors, such as tidbitting for treats for their friends, grooming and snuggling, when they go to sleep or take a nap, standing guard for their friends while the friends dust bathe, finding good nesting spots, which is always a moment of havoc at the sanctuary when a rooster finds a nest for his rooster friends. And then obviously like protecting their friends from other roosters or from perceived threats like birds in the sky or airplanes or butterflies, things like that roosters notice and will make alarm calls for. And the roosters pictured here were really a really tight throuple. From left to right, it's Cass, and Salem. They were bonded super tightly, and it was amazing to watch them kind of be their own little flock, and the way that they bonded with each other and supported each other. And this is a picture of Colin, Bernie, and Piper eating a watermelon treat. And it's kind of funny to give treats to rooster flocks because the roosters all want to do the tidbitting, like, oh, I found a treat, come check it out. So if you give a treat to a rooster, they're less likely to eat it than they are to call their friends over. And so it's like, okay, just eat, just eat yourself. But they kind of get into like they're talking to each other and like, oh no, you eat it, no, you eat it, no, you eat it. It's lots of fun. So another example of a couple of very tight rooster bonds that we have on the left is Fouquet and Bazarov. They've been best friends for I think 4 years now. And then on the right is Fireweed and Chia. They're part of the larger rooster flock that we have, but they are always together, kind of orbiting each other. And when they wander around, they're never more than a few feet apart. And so they're best friends. And then another example. So this one, a group of roosters who all came in together as one single group. Plus, in addition to the group named Leopold, who's kind of the second one from the right there, This group of brothers were always together and kind of functioned almost as their own little unit within the rooster flock. But every now and then there would be like one rooster who would decide to join their little band and hang out, and kind of be with them. It was quite funny to see how they would adopt like other roosters who would join their little brother group there. So wait for my slide to share. So yeah, so over the years, we've seen some really fascinating patterns of behavior within our large rooster flock, that I want to talk a little bit about. And I think because I think it reveals so much about the rich emotional and social lives of roosters that we just never ever hear about and never understand and never see depicted anywhere, because roosters are so stigmatized. So our large rooster flock, it consisted over the years, since 2017, of roosters of varying ages, taken in at different times, varying different breeds, and some about 1.5 acre area with a large that's protected by a large fence. Most of it is forested with tall kind of older trees. And then in the kind of more open yard area, we have planted a lot of like berry bushes and smaller trees and shrubs that give them a lot of enrichment, places to hide and kind of hang out under, and kind of things to jump on and roost on and things like that. So they have a lot of enrichment opportunities, and also plenty of space to kind of wander around on and to spend the day out in. And so what we've seen is that even in this large mixed, this large rooster flock, excuse me, one or sometimes even two roosters would kind of establish himself as the kind of alpha rooster, which meant that like he had the ability to kind of go between different smaller groups, and was kind of the first one to get treats and food. Was also kind of the one who would do a lot of the monitoring for potential threats and when people would dust bathe and stuff like that. And then also was usually the first one to put himself to bed because he had roosting rights, for prime spot in the barn. But then within that larger flock, we would see distinct groups of roosters form up, with sometimes as small as 2 roosters, sometimes as large as 6 roosters, who would kind of be their own little unit that would stay together and then kind of move around the yard together, and then put themselves to bed and kind of sleep together. And so they obviously had their own special little flock, even though they were sharing a larger space with other roosters. And so you had these kind of little distinct units and distinct small flocks that were all sharing one space as a single large rooster flock. And so it was really neat because you got to see these intimate relationships between the small flocks of roosters, like those kind of intimate behaviors that I was talking about earlier. But then in the larger group, like these groups, the larger flock, these small groups would interact, and obviously they would kind of sometimes kind of get into like turf wars and stuff like that. But they very much learned how to coexist both within their small group and then also as part of a larger group. They learned how to be a flock and to coexist and look out for each other in many cases. So we did notice that there would sometimes be scuffles, as is obviously going to happen with any group of individuals. But it was so funny because in very few cases did we have to intervene. In most cases, the roosters, who are, as I pointed out earlier, largely one of their major roles is peacekeeping, they would not tolerate any any bad behavior. So whenever there would be like a misunderstanding or a small scuffle, there would be multiple roosters who would get over and get in between the roosters and kind of rooster dance them and basically like make them break it up. And one of what we started to call some of these roosters the middle managers, because they weren't the alpha rooster, but they were always the ones who would be the first over whenever there was any sign of trouble. So the middle managers did a lot of that kind of peacekeeping and kind of working out of misunderstandings and making sure that there wasn't any kind of bad behavior or fighting or anything like that. So it was really fascinating. That was one of the most, I think, surprising things for me was watching how in a group of roosters, the roosters would be the ones who would kind of manage flock dynamics and monitor behavior and kind of stop instances of like, kind of fighting and scuffling and things like that. So really quickly, I mentioned how the large rooster flock did have an alpha rooster. So Zooey on the left was our first alpha rooster when we first got that area set up for the large flock, and he was amazing. He was just a very, very kind of like he was kind of a nonchalant alpha rooster. He wouldn't like start things. He was obviously just there to kind of keep the peace and watch over everybody. And he had a best friend who was an older rooster named Antaeus, who he kind of like was very tight with, and he wouldn't let anybody else bother Antaeus, even though he was kind of older. And then on the right, we had a co-alpha situation with Greeby, who's the orange and black rooster, and then Jennifer, who's the gray and black rooster. And they were best buddies, but they were kind of the co-head honchos of the large rooster flock. It was really amazing to see how they kind of co-managed the branch, as it were, for many years. So yeah, it was really cool just watching how like the different hierarchies establish themselves both within the larger flock and then within the smaller groups. And so I want to talk a little bit now, before my time is up, about rooster rescue and care. So one of the things that I think is most exciting in recent years is that more and more people have been getting interested in doing rooster rescue, along with just like, both chicken rescue and generally, but also kind of being interested in caring for roosters. And I can't emphasize how bad the need is for rooster homes. Finding a good vegan home that will keep their rooster safe and work with them through, kind of their adolescent period and deal with the crowing and things like that. It's very hard to come by. So, I highly encourage anybody who's potentially interested in doing chicken care and is interested in roosters to please learn more, because there are so many roosters who need homes. So one of the things that's really cool about roosters too is that they are great for microsanctuaries. So chickens in general are fabulous residents at microsanctuaries because they can do very well in urban spaces. They can live indoors and be very happy. And they don't need tons and tons of room to have very, happy lives. Roosters, roosters can do great in microsanctuaries, including both inside and outside. But if you're interested in that and interested in doing rooster rescue and care, just a couple of kind of pointers, things that I would suggest after many years of doing this is to first off to gain hands-on experience if you can with people who know and appreciate roosters. Working with a farmer who begrudgingly has a rooster hanging around may not be the best learning experience. If you're able to find someone who's doing actual compassionate rooster care, I would highly encourage that because a lot of it is really learning how to read their body language and learning how to kind of communicate with them in ways that they don't find threatening, and that you can kind of establish your boundaries with them and things like that. So a lot of that hands-on experience is really, really helpful for doing your own kind of care down the road. And kind of also doing advocacy for roosters because you can talk about your firsthand experience of having a relationship with them. And then, so if you do decide to do rooster rescue, even if you live somewhere that allows roosters, keep in mind that many people in your area don't want to hear roosters crowing. I don't quite understand it. I think rooster crowing is awesome, but a lot of people don't like the sound of roosters crowing. And so even if you live in an area that allows roosters, if you start to get noise complaints, the city or county officials are most likely not going to side with you when it comes to people complaining about you having roosters. So it's really important to approach it with kind of a good neighbor policy in mind, and that's the way that we've done it for since we started to rescue roosters. So things like close your roosters up in coops or houses that can kind of help to buffer the sound. Don't let them like sleep outside, which one isn't safe and isn't healthy for them, in most cases. But also two, like, they're going to start crowing very early in the morning. So, if you have them just outside, that's going to make your neighbors upset more than likely if you have any people nearby. So close them up when they go to bed, which is usually going to be around dusk. So, they shouldn't be crowing late at night because they're going to be in bed. They're going to be putting themselves to bed before it gets dark. And so, that's the best time to close them up. And then don't let them out early in the morning, let them out at more of a decent hour that, won't make your neighbors feel like you're ripping them out of bed with a screaming rooster somewhere nearby. So just, if you're keeping roosters, just kind of take a good neighbor approach, not only so that you can keep on good graces with your neighbors, but also that you reduce the risk of getting a complaint, like a noise complaint. Because again, if you start to get noise complaints, you're probably going to run into problems, and the city or county is not going to, be willing to work with you in many cases. And then also, just keep in mind that house roosters are a thing. Chicken diapers are a thing, and so roosters can do great living inside, and can be you can manage kind of poop issues with chicken diapers. So another tip, go slowly. Part of what makes rooster flocks work is your deep knowledge of rooster behaviors and social dynamics. So really take the time to get to know them and learn about them. Be ready to provide any rooster that you take in with an appropriate living space if bonding doesn't work out. So don't assume that every single rooster is going to tolerate other roosters. So you may need to have a rooster who isn't able to live with other roosters. So aim to become a member of your rooster flock, build trust with them to help avoid misunderstandings with you. The way to do that is to understand their language and their behaviors, and to make yourself a trusted member of their flock. And just also one thing to keep in mind, while roosters usually don't have as many health issues early in life as hens do related to egg production, they can experience a number of common issues. Ones we've seen are things like cancer, especially testicular cancer, heart disease, and arthritis. As they get older, these things can definitely happen. And so like around 4 to 6 years of age, we see is when a lot of these health issues start to crop up. So it can happen at any age, and roosters do get illnesses and need vet care. But just because you don't see as much stuff early on in life, that doesn't mean that your rooster is going to be perfectly healthy for their entire life, and then just like all of a sudden one day drop dead. So if you're interested in doing this chicken rescue, be aware that vet care is going to be a major issue that you need to be ready for. So thank you for listening to me vamp about roosters for a while. Again, this is a topic that's very dear to my heart, and I really appreciate that more people are getting interested in roosters. And yeah, so thanks everybody.
That was wonderful, Alastor. Thank you so much. There are a couple of questions. We do have a little bit of time for them. So
Okay.
One is the best way to explain to people why backyard eggs are still not okay. So some concise way to explain about backyard eggs, why we shouldn't eat them.
Yeah, really quickly. So I did a whole presentation on this last year. You can find it on the Humane Hoax website. It's about the terrible truths of backyard chickens. But generally speaking, on the hen side of things, egg laying is an inherently harmful process for hens, and modern domesticated chickens have been bred to lay a vastly unnatural number of eggs. And so eggs hurt hens, and egg laying is the #1 cause of hen death. So eggs hurt hens. It doesn't matter where those hens live. It's inherently harmful for them to lay the number of eggs that they do. On the rooster side of things, as my presentation has kind of pointed out, is that all scales of chicken farming lead to roosters being killed either as babies or as young adolescents, because roosters aren't wanted, they aren't legal to keep in many places, and so they just become basically a nuisance for people who are farming chickens. And because chickens hatch equal numbers of hens and roosters as babies, every hen in a backyard you can assume has a dead or abandoned brother somewhere. And so every person who keeps a flock of hens in their backyard, all those hens are going to have a rooster who is missing or dead somewhere. And so that in and of itself, those flocks are resulting in the deaths of roosters.
Okay, we have 1 minute. So I'm going to take Sarah's question. It says, I'm getting involved in rooster advocacy. What have you found to be the best avenues to spread the word?
I think really trying to talk up the positive traits and behaviors of roosters is really important. So getting people to say, "Oh, I didn't know that about roosters," and to get interested, I think that's really, really important. Because if you just go in with like all the sad things about roosters, like that can get people upset and angry, but they may not get an established interest in roosters. So we always try to show them not just as victims of the egg industry or the farming industry, but also show all the amazing things of roosters that haven't been told about them, about the truths of roosters. I think that's really fascinating because when other people see, wait a minute, you have a flock with 3 roosters who live together, how's that even possible? Like that gets them asking questions and that gets them interested in, wow, I never really knew that about roosters. So I would say like learn more about those really positive traits and behaviors of roosters and try to talk more about those, because I think those can really be eye-opening for people who didn't know much about roosters already.
Wonderful. And there's a great new resource from the Open Sanctuary Project, a rooster resource that's all about roosters. So you can check that out at the Open Sanctuary Project. And we're going to be hearing more from Tara Hess from that organization later. So, but I think we should
Absolutely.
wrap up now. Thank you so much, Alastor. It was fascinating and amazing and wonderful.
Yeah, thanks everybody.